Here to go in depth on this, political law attorney and a partner in the law firm Foley and Lardner in Washington, D.C., Cleta Mitchell. Cleta joins us by phone, and for purposes of full disclosure, we should point out that once upon a time in Washington, when yours truly was a member of Congress, she served as my legal counsel. Cleta, this whole situation, Lois Lerner received an email and subsequently started sending out emails of her own about Chuck Grassley. Can you give us the facts of this disturbing development?
Well, it's pretty breathtaking, actually. What happened was, apparently, there was a time in 2004, 5, 6, 9, Chuck Grassley had been the chairman and then became the ranking member of Senate Finance, the Senate Finance Committee, which has oversight over the IRS. And Senator Grassley was very intent upon making sure that exempt organizations with tax-exempt status, were operating within the law. And apparently, there was an organization, we don't know who because that was redacted, blacked out in the document. There was an organization that invited Senator Grassley and Lois Lerner to speak to some meeting. And somehow, Senator Grassley's letter was put in the letter to Lois Lerner and vice versa. So Lois Lerner receives this letter addressed to Senator Grassley to speak to this organization about tax-exempt organizations. And in it, it offers to pay the expenses, the travel expenses for Senator Grassley and his wife, both to speak to this meeting. And as a result, Lois Lerner says, well, maybe we should refer him for an audit. I mean, that she literally, I mean, they ended up sorting it out. But then the other most curious thing is that she says to her staff, from her BlackBerry, which is another interesting thing that I'll point out, but this is a BlackBerry email in which she says, I don't think I want to appear on the stage with Senator Grassley to discuss the issue they want me to talk about. And I mean, it's totally disrespectful of Senator Grassley. And it actually, she was going to refer him for an IRS audit.
So
because they were inviting his wife and said they were going to pay the expenses.
So we can infer, based on her editorial comment, that her preference was not to appear on stage, but more troublingly here, to the fact that she's suggesting an audit. Here is someone supposedly impartial, basically using or suggesting the notion of using this agency to go after someone with whom she disagrees politically.
Well, that's right. And, let's not forget this part. So, someone reminded me of this week. Lois Lerner's husband held fundraisers for Obama when he was running for president, by the way. And her politics are pretty clearly left-leaning and Democratic. And so she gets this letter and uses it and says, well, let's refer him for an audit. Curiously, her staff writes back to her and they say, we don't have any basis for referring him for an audit. He's not an officer or director of the organization. It's perfectly permissible for the organization to have offered to pay his wife's travel expenses to accompany him to speak to this meeting. Now that's pretty bad when you've got the underlings telling their boss, boss, you're wrong about this.
And Cleta, when you couple that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in other emails that have not been held up by destroyed disks, etc., to take the IRS excuse, Lois Lerner was essentially petitioning for a role in the Obama re-election campaign in some of the correspondence that exists, which prompts this question, Counselor. We've heard talk that Darrell Issa, chairman of Reform and Government Oversight, is still considering immunity for Lois Lerner. With these new developments, does that suggest that immunity would not be the best course of action in the case of Ms. Lerner?
Well, I think they can talk about it all they want. I don't think it's going to do any good. I don't think she's going to talk to them ever. She thinks she doesn't have to, and I think that I mean, they can talk about immunity, but I doubt that there's anything that they can do in that regard. And I think that here's the problem. I think that the Justice Department is going to protect her as long as she doesn't say or do anything that incriminates the White House or anyone in the White House or anyone on behalf of the White House. And I think if she starts talking, I think that all bets are off, and then the Justice Department would come after her. So I don't think that people can talk about that, but I don't think that that's
so in essence, Cleta, what you're suggesting is that the Eric Holder-led Justice Department, if, for example, she were to be granted immunity and she suddenly started to spill the beans, you believe DOJ would launch the legal equivalent of a preemptive strike against her?
I think that would be her fear, yes. And I think they're completely, it's just, I think that, just think The Godfather. Think about the movie. I think that's exactly what's going on here.
This is troubling. Senator Charles Grassley, for his part, issued this statement, and we quote now, "This kind of thing fuels deep concerns many people have about political targeting by the IRS and by officials at the highest levels. It is very troubling that a simple clerical mix-up could get a taxpayer immediately referred for an IRS exam without any due diligence from agency officials." Now, Cleta, when confronted by this, the IRS says now, no comment because of taxpayer confidentiality.
That's what they always say.
Isn't it very convenient for the IRS to play this kind of game? We should point out my old committee, the House Ways and Means Committee, really got wind of this. It was Chairman Dave Camp speaking out on this yesterday. Let's take a look at what Chairman Camp had to say. Quoting now, "We've seen a lot of unbelievable things in this investigation, but the fact that Lois Lerner attempted to initiate an apparently baseless IRS examination against a sitting Republican United States Senator is shocking. At every turn, Lerner was using the IRS as a tool for political purposes in defiance of taxpayer rights." As I listen to these words and read them again, Cleta, I'm reminded of the fact, and we have about a minute left, that there were senators on the Democratic side. Chuck Grassley comes to mind, Dick Durbin comes to mind, Carl Levin comes to mind, actually writing the IRS, seeking extra examination of conservative groups. Is it beyond the realm of possibility that some of these senators in the world's so-called most exclusive club might have sought investigation of their colleagues in the Senate?
Well, we haven't seen anything to that effect, but look, that what they were doing, and it's very clear that if you look at the House Oversight Committee has created a website that has all of their reports and documentation and all. It's http://oversight.house.gov/IRS, and there is a chronology of all the things that the Democrats in the Senate and the House and the White House, the things that they were doing publicly and privately to demand that the IRS silence organizations that disagreed with the president. That's really what it boils down to. People who were concerned about the growth of government, and these people were saying to the IRS, shut them down, make them be quiet. And that's exactly what they did.
Cleta Mitchell will have to leave it there. Thank you for your insight this morning from Washington, D.C.